So now it's time for the vectorization process of our swan illustration. So I brought this as a JPEG. I just kind of exported it from Procreate and sent it via email to my main desktop computer, where I can go into Illustrator and can go ahead and grab that pen tool and start to trace it. So this is a little bit more of a complex illustration because of all the curves. So I'm just going to have to go at a steady pace. You notice all these rough lines. We're going to be smoothing that out as we do the pen tool. So let me make it a stroke and make it a very vivid color. So we'll do kind of an orange color so I can make out the difference between the illustration and the stroke I'm making. I'm kind of averaging out everything, making it smooth, going along the edges. I'm going to make a lot of stops along the way. And I'm not sure how good you guys are with the pen tool, but it takes some practice to really master it. I'm still, after 13 years, working on it. In this little tiny part, I'm going to make my stops quicker and quicker on my little points where I click, create anchor points. We go real slow here. I can always go back and noodle with anchor points if I don't like a certain curve. Okay, so I finished up the vectorization process, and I'm going to flip this to a neutral color, and that'll give me the chance to go and noodle around with the different anchor points. Maybe add anchor points and mess with the handles to make it a little more to my liking. Maybe thicken lines if I need to thicken them. So I'm going to do that here for about 5 minutes, and then hopefully have a finished logo mark, and then we could start working with our typography. I ended up with 2 different versions of the swan logo. Can you tell the difference? Well, there's a very subtle difference, and it's going to be right here in this area. I have kind of this curve of the S, but I also decided to counter it with a curve in the top of the wing. And this I decided to leave it plain. So we're going to have both versions to try out and see which one we'll end up eventually choosing. We won't really know until we start to pair it with colors and typography, and we might get a better idea of which version we may want to go for. And there's still some little things I can tweak, but just for the sake of time and just showing an example, I could tweak those at a later time. Let me make these smaller and a little bit lower contrast. Let me make it a little bit of a lighter gray. And they're about the same size, pretty close. So I'll have that at option 1 and option 2. So let's work on some typography. So the main logo is Swan, and I've been working with a lot of sans serif lately, which is more kind of contemporary, sleek, and clean design, but I want to do something more elegant and high-end, and I want to use a serif font. So a serif font, I already have a serif font in my head because I love this. It's a very popular one. It's called Didot. Of course, we could try out some other versions, but this is a very classy serif font, and it's got this wonderful thin weight on the right of the lettering, and it's a really beautiful presentation. So I just love this type. So I think that'll go really good with a high-end look. And usually with high-end looks, I like to add spacing between my characters. So let's set the tracking here wide. Seems like I do this a lot, but that seems to kind of make things elevate designs a little bit when you add spacing and breathing room. 333. And it's whatever you want to do with yours. You may hate this font. You may want to go with a different font. That's okay. So we have two different versions. Let me check out, let me do the more clean one without the extra little accent. And this is where we're going to work on balance. So right now, this is actually a decent balance, but I feel like this is too heavy, the typography. So let's balance this a little bit more. We can also show our grid as well. View grid, just to have that available to help us here. So let's say this spans 2 blocks. And any kind of, and this is just a little trick, anytime you have a little accent or the serif that extends out on the top of this N, when I do the grid system and I try to get everything flush and lined up, so I wanted to have this 3 boxes wide, I let the serifs go off. Instead of matching the serif to the very end, I let them go off and I do not count them when I try to balance things, that little thing. Just something I do to help keep it a little more even. Okay, let me take off the grid and do some optical adjustments or manual adjustments to this. So I'm just making sure there's enough white space here, but I don't want a whole big gap. I want these symbols to feel connected. So having this as close as I can, but with just enough breathing room so that you don't feel like it's crowding it out. So maybe a little higher. And this is an off balance symbol, so it's going to be heavy to the left. So this main body, is actually going to be more to the right than it will be centered. So another thing I could do is draw a box around the logo. Just kind of getting an idea of the weight and the balance. Kind of seeing if I like that. So I think that's a good balance. Let me try a couple other versions real quick because it doesn't take much time to have different versions. That's a little bit of a smaller weight, and then we'll do, which I like. So I think the symbol is almost overstated here, and I think it's just right here because it kind of brings out the lettering, which is the point of showing the brand name and the brand mark. So we don't want to forget that. I think this has more of an elegant feel, so I'm already liking the balance of this one. So coloring, and also let me try one more thing. Let me widen the spacing. Let me double it. And see if I like that one better. And I want to split the difference. So let's do something between the two versions. So what would that be? Let's try 480. Let's do a little bit bigger. Let's do 5. And this is just adding spacing and testing out different things. Draw my little box. I think that looks good. Okay. So any versions, I'm going to put it to the side because you never know if I might want to recall that version or bring that version out. And now we need to add kind of a sub-slogan. So there's going to be spa, salon, and yoga. And we're going to need to define that. So spa, salon, and yoga. So this will be our subline or byline. Make sure I spell everything correctly. I'll put plenty of spacing. I'm going to put the same spacing between the words. So I'm just going to copy that and then paste that here. Make sure there's equal spacing. And I may want to mess with the font. I like that, but it needs an element between them. Let me see if I could put a dividing line. It's really popular to do. As opposed to using a bullet point, it looks a little more elegant than a circle. So I just did a little horizontal or vertical line. So we could do that, but I'm afraid that this text, small, serif fonts tend to be harder to read when they're really small, especially when they have this thin weight. So let me copy and paste and try to mix this. And this is where it's helpful to do a serif font paired with a sans serif font, especially the sans serif font that's going to be smaller. So let's do a sans serif font. Let's just do our Open Sans. It's free to use. We don't have to have any copyrights for it. So spa, salon, and yoga. And I could tighten the spacing just a tiny bit. And let's also counter this. So this is kind of a dark color. Let's counter this with a lighter color. So let's do kind of a medium. We're not doing color quite yet. We're almost there. So that's an option. I can change the weight and make it thinner, but not so thin that if we zoom out, we can't see it. So can I still see it at that small level? I can, but I don't think it would hurt to make it maybe at least bold. And also, we got to be careful with spacing. I think that's too tight. So I'm just going to bring that down just a notch. Let it breathe a little bit. Let everything breathe. We go up one notch. Okay. So right now I really love how this looks. I like how that font looks. I just wish the weights weren't so skinny that when I zoomed out I couldn't see it. And so this is where being practical with your logo design. I may love this one better. I may think it looks a little sexier or better paired with that. But sometimes you have to be practical and go with what's going to work on most platforms. And I can read, if I made that a little darker, I can probably read this one better. So just doing my visibility testing is what they call it, which I mentioned earlier. So, I wonder if there's a thicker weight of die dot. I'm sure there is. There is a bold, but is that still too much? I could probably reduce the spacing on this one so I can make the font a little bigger. And then of course add our space. We'll slide this out to the side. So here we are, we're starting to narrow our choices down. And this is when I would probably present both to the client because they may want to go with this one and maybe have an alternate version for when it's really small. Maybe that we use a sans serif as an alternate version for specific items that'll be really small. But it's nice to not have to do that if you can prevent it. To have less amount of logo variations that you have to use as possible just makes the design process and the branding process when you do a lot of other things much more simple.